النبأ العظيم الذي هم فيه مختلفون كلا سيعلمون ثم كلا سيعلمون رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ثم أما بعد. Inshallah, my intention in this brief halaqah is to share with you some things that have been an area of interest of my own for quite some time. The subject, and technically the subject is called the Nazmul Quran, and it's something most people are not very familiar with, but I'll share some things with you about it. It's basically a subject of the organization of the Quran. A lot of times when you study a surah of the Quran, or even if you just read a translation of a surah of the Quran, you might get the feeling that there are a lot of different subject matter and they keep jumping from one topic to another topic, and you don't necessarily see a connection between all of the things that are being mentioned. Not only is there a profound connection between every idea that is mentioned, actually down to every ayah connected to the next ayah, but even overall the architecture, you can look at it as architecture of a surah, is far more amazing than has been given credit. And a lot of the work on this subject, some of it was done historically, like there are some tafasir like Al-Biqa'i rahimahullah wrote Nazmud Durar fi Tanasub al-Ayati was-Suwar. Actually, that was the name of his tafsir. It's the organization of pearls. That's literally what he called it, the organization of pearls, and how the ayat and the surahs connect with each other. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi in the Tafsir al-Kabir, Mafatih al-Ghayb, he also talked a little bit about this subject here and there. And he kind of gave it importance on some occasions. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah in his tafsir, Tafsir Ibn Kathir, he didn't do it all the time, but sometimes he would talk about how the ayat are organized, right? So when they notice something and it's very obvious, it's very apparent, then they would comment on it. Other times it's not so obvious, so they would leave it. But then there are, in more recent times, over the last couple of 100 years, there were scholars that decided that this is not just a side subject, it's actually a very important part of the study of the Quran. And the reason they felt this way is because, actually from an Imani point of view, one of the scholars that really influenced my thinking on this subject a lot, and really shaped the way I study Quran altogether, is a scholar by the name of Hamiduddin Farahi rahimahullah, an Indian scholar who passed away in the late 1800s, but pretty much all of his work was done in Arabic. He only wrote in Arabic. And actually only recently I met a brother when I was in Malaysia. I met a Sudanese fellow who's doing his PhD in Jordan on tafsir, and his subject is Hamiduddin Farahi. And he actually went to India to all the madaris that have some of his old works, and they discovered that he has about 45 books. We only knew about 6 or 7 of them, but there are actually 45 different handwritten manuscripts of Hamiduddin Farahi rahimahullah. Some pretty amazing work, especially on the study of the Quran. The guy, he was no normal scholar. He actually spent 8 years studying Hebrew just so he could understand how the Torah talks about Ismail alayhi salam and Ishaq alayhi salam, so he could comment on the ayat where Ismail alayhi salam is to be slaughtered. Because the Christians and the Jews believe that it's Ishaq alayhi salam. The vast majority of the scholars of the Ummah believe that it's Ismail alayhi salam. We have a minority of scholars who think it's Ishaq also. But he thought it was a very important subject. In order to truly research it, you have to go to the Jewish sources. He was only going to get translations. He decided to study Hebrew and get the answer. And he wrote a book on the subject too. Ar-Ra'yu Sahih fi man huwa dhabih. Amazing, amazing work. But in any case, I want to share with you just briefly some things he said about the nazm of the Quran, the organization of the Quran, that impacted me so much. He actually said, he made an Imani argument. He said Allah Azza wa Jal has order and organization in everything He does. Allah Azza wa Jal created the human being, and He created the human being in a ahsan taqweem, right? And it's this order, our eyes are symmetrically placed on our face. Our bones are perfectly ordered. Every limb in my body, every vein in my body is put in a certain way, and it's organized, and if you move it from its organization, and actually even he was saying this more than 100 years ago, now you know that even a single strand of DNA or a single bacteria has so many elements, biological elements that have to go together in a certain sequence, down to like millions and millions of sub-particles that are in a certain sequence, and you move even one out of its place and there's no longer a life. That's the difference between life and death. So Allah Azza wa Jal created everything around us, and everything He does is actually in a kind of scale and a balance. And as a matter of fact, Allah Azza wa Jal even says, وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ, that Allah placed the scale on everything. And even in what is revealed, Allah Azza wa Jal gave this, part of, one of the names of the revelation is actually Mizan. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, so people can stand with justice, So he says, how can it be that Allah, who organized everything, did not organize His own book? I can't accept that premise. And then he says that Allah Azza wa Jal says to the human being, He says, عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. Allah taught the human being effective communication. Effective communication. In order to communicate effectively, let me tell you, all communication boils down to organization. All of it. A single word is made up of letters, yes or no? And those letters have to be organized in a certain way for that word to make sense. If you change the order of the letters, the word no longer makes sense, or it means something else. And inside of a sentence, you take these words and you organize them to make a single sentence. If you mess with the organization of words inside of a sentence, there's no longer an idea. Inside of a paragraph, so we got words that are organized, then you have sentences that are organized, then when you put sentences together, you get a paragraph. But if you take the last sentence of a paragraph and put it first, and you take the first one and put it in the middle, is it still going to make sense? No. All human communication, even down to a paragraph, you need organization. And then from one paragraph to the second, to the third, to the fourth inside of a book, you can't move the organization because the author's ideas won't be clear anymore. And then from paragraphs, you get chapters. And from chapters, you get books. And even in terms of books, there's a volume 1 and a volume 2 and a volume 3. You can't start with volume 3, you have to start with volume 1. The same thing in a khutbah. If a khatib is giving a good khutbah, you will know that it's a good khutbah because it's organized. Because the khatib started with a point, and he took you from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and you said at the end, that makes sense, okay. And if a khatib is not organized and is saying things from all over the place, you won't remember anything. You'll just, you'll get some good sleep in the khutbah, but you won't remember anything because you can't follow along. He says Allah Azza wa Jal is the best of all speakers. He's the one who taught speech altogether. How is He not going to organize His speech? His speech is going to be the most organized. As a matter of fact, this is al-bayan. What Allah Azza wa Jal gives, al-balagh, the ultimate communication. And since you cannot have communication without organization, it is impossible to think that the word of Allah is without organization. It's impossible. So from that premise, he started working on the surahs of the Quran. Just to understand how Allah organizes His kalam. From that point of view, from the nazm point of view. He, by the qadr of Allah, finished a tafsir of 9 surahs and he passed away. Rahimahullah. He had done work on only 9 surahs and then he passed away. Then more recently, this subject became interesting. There are his students that have done more work. One of the most famous tafasir in the Urdu language, some of you that read Urdu, Amin Ahsan Islahi rahimahullah wrote Tadabbur al-Quran, very famous tafsir in Urdu. That's actually his student, Hamiduddin Farahi's student, who wrote that tafsir in Urdu, and now it's been translated into English also. The first 2 volumes have been translated. It's out of Malaysia if you want to get your hands on it. Just on the organization of the surahs and how things connect to each other. But more recently, what's really interesting is there are non-Muslims who became interested in this subject. Scholars of the Bible, scholars of ancient Aramaic and Hebrew literature became interested in the study of the organization of the Quran. And they've been doing this work in Western universities. I know normally we think of mustashriqeen like the Orientalists. They study Islam to destroy Islam or to dissect Islam. But this is a different category of Western scholars. They're not interested in debating whether or not the Quran is authentic or whether it makes ethical sense or not. These are people of literature. They just study literature. And they're looking at the Quran as literature. And one of the most interesting stories of those people is a fellow named, there are 2 people I want to mention. There's one of them, his name is Professor Neil Robinson. He's from England, he's fluent in 8 languages, and he's been studying Islam for 50 years. This man's been studying Islam for 50 years. He wrote a book on the Quran, Unveiling a Veiled Text. This book on the Quran is basically Ulum al-Quran for Western universities. Okay? He was non-Muslim when he wrote the book. And this book is used if anybody wants to do a PhD in Islamic studies at Georgetown University, at Princeton, at Harvard, if they want to go to Oxford and do a study of Islam, non-Muslim studies in Islam, the first book on the Quran is his book. He became Muslim. He took Shahada. We actually invited him to Dallas. He flew in from, he lives in Belgium now. He flew in from Belgium and spent a week with us at the Institute and shared some of his studies with us. Very interesting, unique fellow. But, and I asked him, because he was an Anglican minister. And he has some strange ideas still, but regardless, I asked him, what is it about the Quran that gets you? Because he had written his book in the 1980s, 1983 or something. What is it that really appeals to you? You know what he says? He says the recitation. He says the recitation. He says, when I hear the Quran being recited, the flow of it takes me into another world. And he says that I felt that way before I was even Muslim. Subhanallah. So he's a very interesting person, and he wrote about the organization of the surahs also. This guy is so interesting. He studied Urdu because he knew there's a scholar who's worked on the organization of the Quran, Amin Ahsan Islahi. So he went to see Islahi in Pakistan and spent 2 years with him. And these people, when they study, they put us to shame. Wallah. And he wasn't even Muslim then. And he had that much rigor in his studies. Anyway, the next person I want to mention before I tell you some things about this surah is a fellow named Raymond Farron. He's from Georgetown University. He's originally from New Jersey. He did his PhD in Arabic literature and Arabic poetry, actually, at Georgetown University. Georgetown is one of the few universities in America that has a PhD in Arabic program. UT Austin has one. Georgetown, Columbia has one. Very, very few. So one of the most prestigious programs is at Georgetown. So he went and did his PhD there. If you guys, if you're ever bored to death and you listen to NPR because you're stuck in traffic, sometimes they interview these quirky people, these usually, white, middle-class people that decide to do a PhD in things that you would never find a brown person do a PhD in that subject. Yeah, I decided to study ants. And they're interviewing this guy who studied ants. And another guy studied like leaves in Texas or something. And you're like, what? If our parents found out that we're studying ants, we'd get a kind of jamaat, like, you don't have enough ants on the floor, you need to study ants, what's wrong with you, But these guys, they don't do like medicine and engineering, they want to do like some quirky curiosity thing. This guy sitting in Jersey got curious about Arabic and poetry, Arabic poetry. So he decides to do his PhD in Arabic poetry. For no religious reason, he's just interested. And his PhD was on the organization of classical Jahili Arab poetry. Nabigha, other shu'ara. He used to study them and show how they had organization of thought. Because at the end of the day, all literature has some organization of thought. And as part of that study, he decides that he's going to look into the Quran also, because he looked at the Quran like a big piece of poetry. From a non-believer's point of view, it's just another body of Arabic literature, classical Arabic literature. If he's going to look at all the famous Arabic works, well, the most famous Arabic work is what? Is the Quran, so might as well look at its architecture also. He's not studying tafsir, he's not looking at hadith, he's just a literary guy. He studied Arabic exhaustively. The guy's just brilliant at Arabic. You can find his interviews from Kuwait and from Bahrain on national television, the entire hour interview bil-Arabiya. يتكلم بكل فصحى سبحان الله. And every haraka correct. It's amazing, this guy. So anyway, he starts studying the Quran and he starts noticing a kind of organization he's never seen before. And he starts writing about it, taking notes on it and writing about it. And in the course of writing about it, he came to the conclusion, this cannot be from a human being. He took Shahada. This professor in Georgetown University, who's never hung out technically with Muslims, came to the conclusion that the Quran is miraculously organized from his own studies, even wrote a book on it called Structure in the Quran. You can look it up by Raymond Farron, Structure in the Quran. I went to meet with him more than a year ago. I went to Kuwait to meet with him. He teaches Arabic at the University of Kuwait. And he teaches 5th year master's degree students from Kuwait learn Arabic from him. They study poetry with him. And they complain a lot. نتعلم العربية من أمريكي. We have to learn Arabic from this white guy. What's he doing? So he says, yeah, they have a problem, but I still teach them or whatever. So I invited him also to our institute, and he had taught a little bit to our students and shared some things from poetry and from Quran and things like that. But anyway, coming to the subject. So this subject is very fascinating. Some really interesting scholarship is being done within this field. And we're discovering some things that have not been talked about in our history. But that doesn't make them any less valid. At the end of the day, we follow evidence. We follow where the evidence goes. And Allah Azza wa Jalla says, بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ. This book is in Arabic, clear Arabic speech. So if you have a theory about how it's organized, then the theory itself has to be very what? Clear. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about Surah Naba. Surah Naba is the beginning of 30th juz. Most people hear it, at least if they haven't memorized it, they hear it recited all the time. And just to make the subject easy for you, just so you can read this yourself when you go home, I'm going to break it up for you. Surah Naba is broken up into 7 parts. Surah Naba is broken up into 7 parts, okay? Now here's how it works. The first part, and the third part, and the 5th part, and the 7th part. 1, 3, 5, and 7. All of them have to do with Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of resurrection. Which parts have to do with Yawm al-Qiyamah again? 1, 3, 5, and 7. Now listen. عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ. That's the first section. What are they asking about? About the great event? You know, the one that they disagree about? They're going to find out very soon. No, they'll find out very soon. What event are they? What event is Allah talking about? The Day of Judgment. That's section 1. Now look at section 3. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنَّ يَوْمَ الْفَصْلِ كَانَ مِيقَاتًا يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي الصُّورِ فَتَأْتُونَ أَفْوَاجًا وَفُتِحَتِ السَّمَاءُ فَكَانَتْ أَبْوَابًا وَسُيِّرَتِ الْجِبَالُ فَكَانَتْ سَرَابًا. The day of separation is a time that's already set. The day when the trumpet will be blown into, and all of you will come in large armies, and the sky will be opened up, turned into doors, and the mountains shall start sailing and look like a mirage. You won't even believe your eyes. What day is this? Judgment Day. What section did I just read to you? 3. So 1 is about Judgment Day, 3 is about Judgment Day. Okay, now I'll read a little bit of 5, okay? إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا لَا يَرْجُونَ حِسَابًا وَكَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا كِذَّابًا وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ كِتَابًا فَذُوقُوا فَلَن نَّزِيدَكُمْ إِلَّا عَذَابًا. Those people didn't expect that the accounting will ever happen. They didn't hope for the accounting to ever happen. And they used to lie about our ayat. And we have recorded everything in a book. Now taste the punishment. When is the accounting going to happen? When is the book that has everything recorded, when is that going to be shown? Day of Judgment. What section did I just read to you? 5. Okay, now look. Last section. لا رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما الرحمن لا يملكون منه خطابا يوم يقوم الروح والملائكة صفا لا يتكلمون إلا من أذن له الرحمن وقال صوابا ذلك اليوم الحق فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه مآبا إنا أنذرناكم عذابا قريبا يوم ينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا. This is the final section. Read some of the translation for you. The master of the skies and the earth and whatever lies between them, the excessively merciful, they are not going to be able to speak. They won't have the power to speak a word. Which day is no creation able to speak? Day of Judgment. The day on which the Ruh, meaning Jibreel alayhi salam, and all the angels stand in rows. None shall speak except the one that Ar-Rahman gives permission to, and he shall speak the upright thing, meaning the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going to be given permission to speak on Judgment Day. ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمُ الْحَقِّ. That is the ultimately true day. That is the real day. Then whoever wants can find their way back to their master. We are warning you of a painful, of a nearby punishment. The day on which a person will look at everything their hands have put forward, and the disbeliever will say, if only I was turned into dust. This is all a scene of what? Judgment Day. So now let's review back. 1, 3, 5, 7. All of them are about what? Judgment Day. Now before I go any further, which sections did I skip on purpose? 2, 4, 6. We'll get to them in a second. But let's talk a little bit more about 1, 3, 5, and 7. In section 1, I briefly translated it for you. They question Judgment Day. What are they asking each other about? عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ. They're disagreeing with each other. They're sarcastically asking each other questions. You think it's really going to happen? Come on. There's not going to be a Judgment Day. They're joking around and talking about it, and Allah is threatening them and saying, كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ. They'll find out soon enough. Oh, no, they're going to find out all right. You hear that? So in the first section, they're talking nonsense. What happens in the last section? Nobody can talk. Everybody's quiet. And the only one who speaks says the right thing. In the first section, Allah said, soon they will find out. In the last section, He said, عَذَابًا قَرِيبًا. Punishment that is very nearby. Nearby. And by the way, when they were making jokes about it, they weren't taking it seriously. But by the end, in the 7th section, Allah says, يوم يقول وينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا. The same guy who was making fun in the first section is now saying, if I could just be turned into dust now. Okay, I get it, it's real. I don't want to deal with this. What I'm trying to tell you is the first section is actually completed by the 7th section. 1 and 7 work with each other. The third section that I read to you was Allah Azza wa Jal said that the day of separation will come, the sky will be opened up, the mountains are going to move, the earth is going to get laid out. In other words, the universe is shifting. But it doesn't say why is it shifting. It just says that it's shifting. It says the sky is being opened up, the mountains are moving out of place, right? Everything's getting messed up in the world, but you don't know why. Well, guess which section gives the answer why? Section 5, the 5th section. And what do you find in the 5th section? In the 5th section you find these people thought that they're not going to be held to trial. They thought that they could just lie about our ayat. We recorded everything because once the earth, when the mountains are moved and the earth is turned into a field, when the sky is opened up and the legions of angels descend, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا, when that happens, then the scrolls are laid out of deeds and everybody gets to see. You needed all this space for humanity to stand up again to trial and for all of their deeds to be judged. So 3 is answered by what? 5. It's amazing. That you don't, when you're just reading it, you don't realize that there's a symmetry in place. 1, 3, 5, and 7. Now what was left? 2, 4, and 6. Now let's talk about 2, 4, and 6. Section 2 is about the world that you can see around you. Number 2 is about the world as it is right now. So listen. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلِ الْأَرْضَ مِهَادًا وَالْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَجَعَلْنَا نَوْمَكُمْ سُبَاتًا وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا وَجَعَلْنَا النَّهَارَ مَعَاشًا وَبَنَيْنَا فَوْقَكُمْ سَبْعًا شِدَادًا وَجَعَلْنَا سِرَاجًا وَهَّاجًا. This is section 2. In section 2, Allah says, didn't I make the earth a comfortable place for you to sleep? Didn't I make the mountains, وَالْجِبَالَ, and mountains as pegs that stay in place and set you down? And didn't I make you into pairs, man and woman? Didn't I make your sleep a time where you can just be cut off from all of your concerns? It doesn't matter if somebody has cancer or major debt or stress or fights or trouble. When they're asleep, all their trouble disappears. They get cut. It's like Allah puts the pause button on your life and then subat. This is subat actually. He cuts you off from everything. He just temporary death for you. You're dead to the world basically, and the world is dead to you when you're asleep. وَجَعَلْنَا نَوْمَكُمْ سُبَاتًا. Then he says, وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا وَجَعَلْنَا النَّهَارَ مَعَاشًا. He made the night into a clothing over you, and He made the day a means by which you can earn a living. وَبَنَيْنَا فَوْقَكُمْ سَبْعًا شِدَادًا. And He made the sky above you, the 7 above you that are very intense, and He put a brilliant lamp in there, sirajan wahaja. All of these are things you can observe or know. This is the only section of the surah. By the way, let me quiz you. What section is this? Very good. This is the only section of the surah that does not require iman. Everything else in the surah requires iman, because Day of Judgment, I haven't seen it. The people not being able to speak, the angels coming down, I haven't seen any of it. But have I seen the sky? Have I seen the earth? Have I seen the mountain? Have I seen man and woman in pairs? Do I know about sleep? I know these things. So this section does not require iman. This is the life as everybody experiences it. Now this is all of life, or is this one section of life? This is one piece of life. The believer knows life goes on, doesn't it? And if you understand what 1 and 3 and 5 and 7 were, 1 and 3 and 5 and 7 were all about Judgment Day, but Judgment Day is not where our life continues. Where does our life continue? It's after Judgment Day, hereafter. And in the hereafter, what happens? Either you end up in Jannah or you end up in Jahannam. In this world right now, good people and bad people are together. In this world, we're all paired together. But after Yawm al-Fasl, the day of separation, the good and the bad cannot live in the same place anymore. The good will end up in Jannah, the bad will end up in Jahannam. You can guess what sections 4 and 6 are going to be. 4 is Jahannam, 6 is Jannah. 4 is Jahannam and 6 is Jannah. So 2 was the life in this world, and 4 and 6 are the 2 lives in the next world. That actually completes the entire picture. But let me take you back. I mentioned to you there's sections 1, 3, 5, 7. I mentioned to you that there's sections 2, 4, and 6, and how they're all related to each other. But you know what's even wilder? Each section inside of itself has a symmetry. Each section, I'm not going to walk you through all of it because you'll go crazy. But I'll tell you some of it. I'll share some of it with you. If you look at the first section, which was عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ. Even from a language point of view, it's perfectly balanced. There's 2 questions. عَمَّا عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ. عَنْ occurs twice. The answer occurs twice. كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ ثُمَّ كَلَّا سَيَعْلَمُونَ. And the middle is الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ. There's a middle. There's 2 above it and 2 below it. And the 2 above it match and the 2 below it match. It's a perfect fit. Then when you get to the section of this world, that's one of my favorite sections in the surah. Actually, you know why? It's called Istidlalul Quran. How does the Quran convince its audience of something they can't see? You see, at the end of the day, this is da'wah to those who don't believe in the akhirah. And the only thing in the surah that they can use to reach that conclusion is which section? 2. Everything else is showing them the conclusion. But what is the path to that conclusion? Now listen to this very carefully. Everything Allah mentioned in the second section was in pairs. Everything was in pairs. And even those pairs are symmetrical. Let me show you. The first pair Allah mentioned was, He made the earth flat and He made the mountains on top of the earth. The earth has been paired with the mountains. Why is that important? Because the earth is vast, but what's the most prominent thing you see on the earth? Mountains. By the time this section comes to an end, Allah mentions the skies, and then the most prominent thing you see in the sky, وَجَعَلْنَا سِرَاجًا وَهَّاجًا. The earth and the mountains are at the beginning, the sky and the sun are at the end. So the style here is, you mention the entire thing and mention the most visible thing on it. Then you mention the sky and you mention the most visible thing at the end. So there's a tanasub between the beginning and the end. Allah then said He made you into pairs. He made who into pairs? Man and woman. Man and woman. And then if you look at towards the end, He says He made night and day. وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا وَجَعَلْنَا النَّهَارَ مَعَاشًا. Subhanallah. The relationship of a man and a woman, they work together and they complete each other just like what? The night and the day. Just like the night and the day. But there's only one thing. And by the way, this is the middle ayah of this section. There's only one thing that is not paired. On purpose. Allah, you notice everything Allah said so far was paired. Man was paired with woman. Earth was paired with mountain. Sky was paired with sun. Day was paired with night. There's only one thing that is not paired. وَجَعَلْنَا نَوْمَكُمْ سُبَاتًا. That's in the middle. He made your sleep something that cuts you off. Remember I talked to you about sleep? But if you're going to talk about sleep, then what should you pair it with? Think about it. What is the pair of sleep? Waking up. Waking up. Man is compared with woman. Sleep must be compared with waking up. But there's no mention of istiqadh. There's no mention of waking up. But then you realize, if you're listening and you're pondering carefully over the ayat, wouldn't you come to realize yourself that the logical pair of sleeping is what? Waking up. Now listen to this carefully, then you'll understand the surah and the beauty of the surah. For the Muslims, when we go to sleep, it is actually a form of death. When we go to sleep, we say, Bismika Allahumma amutu wa ahya. Not anamu wa astayqiz. We say amutu wa ahya. In the name of Allah, I die and I wake up. And I come back to life. When we wake up in the morning, the masnoon dua is Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'dama amatana. Alhamdulillah to the one who woke us up after He had given us death. For us, sleep is like what? Death. And if sleep is like death, then waking up is like what? being brought back from death. Isn't it? Because if you're being brought back to life, that means resurrection. Just like waking up from sleep is logical. It's logically paired. This life is logically paired with what? Waking up. Allah did not mention the pair because He wants the listener to arrive at that conclusion themselves. That you're going to wake up. And by the way, when you wake up, what day will it be? The day of judgment. The day that keeps coming in the surah, every other section. He keeps reminding you of what's going to happen when you wake up. Subhanallah, how remarkable, how fascinating the organization of the Quran is. Every single surah like that. And there's a different kind of study, right? There's a study of when you study the ayat in order. First one to the second one to the third one to the fourth one. There's a beauty in that too. Like I'll share one of the beauties of that with you. The first thing Allah mentioned was the earth as mihad. You know what mihad comes from? It comes from mahad. Mahad means the holding of a mother, the softness of a mother. The earth is compared to a woman because it has a mahad. And then what did Allah pair the earth with? The mountain. The mountain is watid, autad, something stable and held in place. Like what? The man. The softness of the woman and the firmness and the stability that who brings stability to the household? The man does, and that's why the very next ayah is just like the earth and the mountain. وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. He made you into pairs. SubhanAllah, even how the ayat flow from one to another. And in calling the earth a mahad, which means a place to sleep also. And the mountain, a tent. Autad is actually pegs. They don't use a peg unless you're going to put up a tent. This was actually something that the Arabs used to think about all the time because they traveled all the time. Now when they travel, they don't look for a Holiday Inn sign back in the day. Or a Marriott or a, Where are they going to stop for rest? They go, time for a rest stop. Where I'm standing is the rest stop. I'm just going to take the tent off my back, lie down. And then what am I going to do in the morning? Going to roll it up and keep going, isn't it? Allah Azza wa Jal is using the language that the Arab understands as the language of a traveler. Because a traveler, the entire earth is his mahad. And wherever he needs to go to sleep, what is it? It's his watid. He puts the tent down. Why is that important? Allah is describing just like you travel and then you go to sleep and you roll up your tent in the morning and go, Allah will one day roll up this entire earth like a tent is rolled up. And this earth is like the journey of a night travel. It's nothing like, ashiyatan aw duhaha, that when they come on Judgment Day, they're going to think they just stayed one night and they packed up and left the next morning. That's the imagery of the life of this world described in this beautiful, beautiful surah. So at the end of all of this, what I wanted to share with you is the study of the Quran is a gift of Allah Azza wa Jal to this ummah. And that's a gift that will never stop. Like the giants that came before us that studied this book and wrote the tafasir on the Quran, they have made their contribution, and the generations that came after them built on their shoulders, and the ones that came after them built on their shoulders and did more reflection and more study and a deeper look. And Allah Azza wa Jal, like al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min, the wisdom is the lost treasure of the believer. Now there are things about the study of the Quran that are becoming apparent to us that we can even show to the non-Muslims and anybody else, and even they can visibly see and say, whoa, this is something incredible. I'll leave you with this. One of the first criticisms made of the Quran in Western civilization, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, ordained the study of the Quran over 500 years ago. They actually assigned a department in the Catholic Church at the Vatican. The specialization was going to be the study of the Quran. So they can criticize the Quran, so they're better equipped to preach the message of Christianity in the Muslim lands. Right? So they started studying Quran 500 years ago, and they've been studying it since. And what you study in Orientalist schools and all of this stuff, this is only an extension of what they started then. And one of the earliest criticisms you find of the Quran that they say they can use to dissuade the Muslims from Islam is they'll say that the Quran is wholly unorganized. It's entirely unorganized. And now we're in a position like never before to not only demonstrate the organization of the Quran to Muslims for our own benefit, but even show it to the non-Muslims.
and to show that this book has an organization that the world has never seen in any book. No book before this book has the kind of organization that this has. Subhanallah. So inshallah ta'ala with these thoughts, I will leave you. Do your own reading of Surah Naba for yourself, inshallah ta'ala, and identify where those sections were and ponder over their meanings. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakum Allah.